Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a document today that still has people talking, even decades later. It's Humanae Vitae.
Oh, yeah. Humanae Vitae. It's definitely got staying power, that's for sure.
Why do you think this papal letter from all the way back in 1968 still gets people fired up?
And a big part of it is the timing. 1968. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
You've got the Vietnam War going on, the civil rights movement is gaining momentum, and all sorts of traditional ideas about, just about everything were being challenged.
So this document kind of drops right into the middle of all that.
Right into the thick of it.
Okay, so you keep calling it a papal letter. For those of us who aren't, Vatican insiders, what does that actually mean?
So it's a letter from the Pope, right, to Catholics all over the world.
Yeah.
But it's not just any letter. It's, how can I put this? Think of it like an official teaching document.
Like a memo from the top, basically.
Yeah, kind of. But here's the thing. Humanae Vitae, it wasn't just for Catholics. It was addressed to all people of goodwill, so it was trying to spark a bigger conversation.
Interesting. So they were aiming for a wider audience, not just preaching to the choir. I like that. Okay, so back to 1968. Lots of change happening. You mentioned the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement. I'm guessing things like the changing roles of women and anxieties about overpopulation were part of the mix, too.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the document talks about these anxieties right in Section 9.
Really?
Yeah, the Pope acknowledges these concerns.
Like head on.
Pretty much. I mean, this is just a few years after the baby boom peaked, right?
Right.
So the idea of rapid population growth, limited resources, all of that, it was very real for people.
And how could you ignore the changing role of women? More women in the workforce demanding equal rights.
Exactly. It was challenging traditional ideas about family in a major way. I mean, you can't separate Humanae Vitae from that context.
So Humanae Vitae walks right into this perfect storm. What's its response? Is it just telling people to have fewer kids?
It does talk about, responsible parenthood,
Right.
but it's not as simple as have fewer children. It goes way deeper. It lays out a whole view of love, marriage, even the purpose of human life, and it puts God right at the center.
Okay, you've got my attention now. God at the center. You're going to have to unpack that for me.
Yeah.
What does Humanae Vitae say about God and love and marriage? How are those connected?
All right. So the encyclical starts by saying all love comes from God. He's like the source of all love. And then it gets really interesting. Marriage, it says, it's not just some human thing, a contract or whatever. It's sacred. It's something established by God with a divine purpose.
So not just a piece of paper or a tradition.
Right.
There's more to it, something deeper going on.
Exactly. A spiritual dimension to it, according to Humanae Vitae.
Okay. So then how does a couple live out this divine purpose?
Well, that's where the 4 characteristics of married love come in. Pay close attention, because these are really important. First, married love is fully human, meaning it involves our whole selves, body, and spirit.
Okay.
It's also total. You give all of yourself, holding nothing back. It's faithful,
Right.
meaning exclusive until death, no exceptions. And finally, it's fecund,
Fecund.
meaning life-giving, open to creating new life.
Wow, those are, that's a pretty high bar. I mean, even people outside the Catholic Church, they can see the beauty in those ideals. I'm guessing, though, that life-giving part, that's where the controversy starts, right?
It's definitely a key part of the debate, especially when it comes to the question of, birth control.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. The encyclical makes a very specific distinction between what it considers acceptable and unacceptable ways to plan a family.
Okay, hold on. Before we get there, when Humanae Vitae says love should be life-giving, does that mean every couple is obligated to, have as many kids as possible?
Not exactly. It emphasizes responsible parenthood.
So how do those two things go together? Be open to life, but also plan responsibly?
That's where that whole distinction between what it calls artificial birth control and, natural family planning. That's where that comes in.
All right, well, we've got to unpack that. What exactly does Humanae Vitae say about responsible parenthood?
It's not just about the mechanics of birth control.
Okay, good.
It's about understanding your biology, natural fertility cycles. It's about self-control, considering your circumstances, and, crucially, making choices that line up with what the church calls natural law.
Natural law. Yeah, okay. Now you're really throwing me into the deep end. What does that even mean in this context?
So imagine natural law as like a built-in moral compass. It's this idea that there's an order, a design to creation, and this order reflects God's will.
Okay.
And it's accessible to human reason, so we can understand it by looking at the world around us. So when it comes to Humanae Vitae, it means we're supposed to respect those natural processes of human reproduction, not try to manipulate them or stop them.
So, like messing with the blueprint, especially when it comes to making babies, that's where things get tricky, ethically.
You got it. And that leads right into the whole debate about artificial birth control, which the encyclical condemns, versus natural family planning, which it allows.
Okay, I was wondering when we get to that. But before we do,
Sure.
you said the church makes a very specific distinction between artificial birth control and natural family planning.
A very important distinction.
Can you give me, like, just a little preview,
That's love.
a teaser for what's coming up after the break?
Well, I'll tell you this. It all hinges on how each one approaches the natural process of conception. One tries to work with it, the other to, override it.
Ooh, cryptic. All right, listeners, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive into the heart of the birth control debate and find out exactly what Humanae Vitae has to say about it. Okay, so we're back and ready to tackle the big controversy. The thing Humanae Vitae is most known for, its stance on artificial birth control.
Yeah, no way around it. That's the part that gets the most attention, even all these years later.
So let's get right to it. What does the encyclical actually say?
Well, it's pretty clear. Artificial birth control, always morally wrong. Full stop.
Wow. No wiggle room there.
Nope. And it spells it out, not just like vague pronouncements. We're talking the pill, condoms, IUDs, anything that directly blocks conception after the act has already begun.
Okay, so a firm line drawn in the sand.
Yep.
But help me understand the why. Why such a strong stance against it? What's the underlying principle here?
It goes back to that idea of natural law and the purpose of marriage. We talked about that earlier.
Right, marriage having the divine purpose.
Right. And part of that purpose, according to the church, is that the marital act is meant to be both unitive and procreative.
Unitive and procreative. So one, it brings the couple together, and two, it's open to the possibility of new life.
Exactly. Two sides of the same coin, and they're supposed to be together. That's how God designed it. And using contraception, well, that breaks the connection. It separates those two things, the unitive and procreative, and that's seen as going against God's design, against natural law.
So it's not just about the act itself. It's about respecting the bigger picture.
The whole point of sex within marriage, yeah.
Okay, I get that. But some people would say, well, that's pretty outdated, even harmful maybe.
Yeah.
Especially in a world with, concerns about overpopulation, STDs, all of that. How would you respond to that?
That's a valid question, and honestly, a lot of people struggle with it. I think part of the church's response is to focus on consequences.
Consequences.
Like what happens if you separate sex from its procreative potential? Humanae Vitae argues that, well, it can have some negative ripple effects, both for individuals and for society as a whole.
Okay, so you're talking about that domino effect argument. What were some of the specific concerns that Pope Paul VI raised?
Well, one concern is that it could lead to a kind of a loosening of morals. The idea is if you remove the natural consequence, pregnancy, there's less incentive for people to be responsible, to stay faithful in their marriage, to treat each other with respect.
I see. So it's like, give them an inch, they'll take a mile.
Yeah, something like that. But it's more nuanced than that, really.
Okay.
The document also worries about how it might change the way men and women see each other.
In what way?
Well, it argues that separating sex from procreation, it could reduce women to objects, just used for pleasure without regard for their dignity.
That's a concern I've heard from others as well, not just, from the church.
Yeah, it's not a new idea.
Right. But, you could also argue that access to family planning actually empowers women, gives them control over their own bodies, their futures, maybe even reduces the need for government intervention.
For sure, there are different perspectives on this, and it's complicated, but the encyclical, it goes even further. It raises a concern that I think is really relevant today. It's the potential for government overreach.
Wait, what does government overreach have to do with birth control?
Think about it. If artificial birth control is widely accepted, totally available, then governments might be tempted to use it as a tool, to control population growth.
I hadn't thought of that angle.
Yeah, they might start implementing policies that encourage or even, force people to limit family size.
Kind of a scary thought.
Right. And in a worst case scenario, who knows? They might start deciding who gets to have kids, who doesn't. It sounds far-fetched maybe, but...
I mean, especially back then, 1968, the memory of of totalitarian regimes and eugenics, that was still pretty fresh in people's minds.
Exactly. And that's part of what Humanae Vitae is warning against. Handing over that kind of power to the state, especially when it comes to something as personal as family. It's really advocating for individual freedom, the right to make these decisions according to your conscience.
Okay, so we've got these potential downsides. Moral decline, objectification of women, government control. But Humanae Vitae doesn't just offer a bunch of don'ts, right? It also offers a positive alternative,
Mm,
a way for couples to plan their families responsibly, but without going against church teachings.
right, it does. And that brings us to natural family planning, which is usually called NFP.
Okay, so let's talk about NFP, because I'll admit I'm a little fuzzy on the details. How is it actually different from contraception? Especially if the intention is the same, to avoid pregnancy. You're
Yeah.
still trying to control when you have kids, right?
Right. But the difference is in the how. NFP is all about working with a woman's natural fertility cycles. Basically, you track her cycle, figure out when she's most likely to conceive and when she's not. And couples use this information to either achieve or avoid pregnancy.
So you're working with the body, not against it.
Exactly.
But if a couple using NFP abstains during, the fertile times to avoid pregnancy,
Mhm.
isn't that essentially the same as using contraception? I mean, the goal is the same, isn't it?
The encyclical says there's a big moral difference. It has to do with, well, with respecting the natural process. You're not shutting it down, you're cooperating with it. Think of it like this. Imagine a farmer. He wants to grow a certain crop. He can choose which seeds to plant, when to plant them, how to take care of them, but he can't change the fundamental laws of nature, right? How plants actually grow.
Ah, okay. I see where you're going.
NFP is like the farmer working with the natural system, whereas artificial contraception is like trying to, you know, genetically modify the seeds,
Yeah,
force a specific outcome.
that's a really good analogy. So it's all about intention, how you approach the process.
That's a big part of it, yeah. NFP is about cooperation, contraception is about domination.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. But let's be real, isn't NFP a lot less effective than, modern birth control?
Mhm.
What does the church say to couples who, maybe they're struggling to space their children or just don't feel ready for more?
Well, it does acknowledge that concern, and in fact, Humanae Vitae actually calls for more research, like to find methods of natural family planning that are both effective and in line with church teaching.
So it's not like a closed book. It can evolve as science evolves.
Yeah, right. And it's worth noting that NFP methods have come a long way since 1968. There are new techniques, a much better understanding of women's cycles.
I see. So it's not just stuck in the past. But beyond the specifics of NFP, it feels like Humanae Vitae is getting at something deeper, maybe, but the very nature of love and responsibility.
You're right, it is. It's not just about rules, it's about striving for what the document calls a more human world.
A more human world. I love that.
Yeah.
What does that actually look like? What's the vision here?
Well, it's a world where love is real, it's self-giving, relationships are based on respect, on dignity, people are responsible for their fertility, and the family is protected, seen as the foundation of society.
Those are beautiful ideals, and I bet they resonate with people no matter what their faith is. But let's be honest, it's also pretty challenging, especially in our culture, where, everything's about instant gratification, individual freedom above all else.
For sure. It goes against the grain in a lot of ways.
Did Paul VI offer any guidance on how to live this out, how to actually make it real?
Well, the document talks a lot about the need for self-discipline, mastery over our emotions. And it suggests that actually practicing periodic abstinence, like with NFP, that can actually strengthen a marriage, make the love deeper, the respect between spouses greater.
Interesting. So it's not just about avoiding pregnancy. It's almost like a spiritual discipline, a way to grow in love.
Yeah, I think there's something to that.
But I imagine it was tough for him, putting out these teachings, knowing that a lot of people wouldn't like it, wouldn't agree.
Oh, absolutely. Remember that phrase he used, the clamorous outcry? He knew there would be pushback. It frustrated him, that people seemed to be choosing comfort and convenience over what he saw as truth.
It sounds like he was really worried about the direction society was heading in. But was it all doom and gloom? Did he offer any hope?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's not just a, finger-wagging lecture. It's a call to action, an invitation to build something better, that more human world we were talking about. And that call isn't just for individuals, it's for those in power too. Public authorities, governments.
What does Humanae Vitae say about the role of government? Does it want them to just stay out of it, or does it see a role for them in supporting families?
It's kind of both. On the one hand, yeah, it's clear
Hmm.
governments shouldn't interfere with, the personal decisions of couples. But on the other hand, it also calls on them to support families, to make it easier to have kids, to create a society where it's not seen as a burden, but a blessing.
So protect individual freedom and recognize that families need support. That seems relevant no matter what year it is,
Totally. Especially today, right?
right? So many families are struggling.
It's true. It's like so many of these themes that we're talking about, the value of family, responsible parenthood, technology, even that concern about government overreach, they're all still so relevant today.
It's amazing. This document from over 50 years ago, and we're still wrestling with the same questions. It really makes you think.
Hmm.
But before we wrap up, did Paul VI have anything to say to science? I mean, this was a time of huge scientific advancements, right?
Hmm.
Especially in the area of reproduction.
That's a great question. And he did. Actually, one of the most hopeful parts of Humanae Vitae, it's where he calls on scientists to use their knowledge, their skills, to develop methods of family planning that are effective and in line with natural law. He saw science and faith as partners, not enemies, working together to build a better future.
I like that. Science and faith working together. It's a nice thought, especially these days when there's so much tension between those two.
For sure. But really, it's a reminder that the conversation Humani Vitae started, it's not over, it's ongoing, and we all have a role to play in it.
Well, I know I've got a lot to think about. We've covered so much ground. The history, the philosophy, the practical stuff.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process.
I know, right?
It's a lot. So before we go, can you give us like the top three things to remember about Humanae Vitae, the big takeaways?
The main points, you mean? Okay, so number one, Humani Vitae, it grounds married love in God. Marriage is sacred. It's got this divine purpose. It's not just some human thing.
Right, not just a contract.
Exactly. Number two, it defines responsible parenthood, but not in a simple way. It's this multi-layered thing, involves understanding natural law, self-control, and aligning your choices with God's plan.
Right, that moral order we were talking about.
Right. And then number three, that clear distinction, artificial birth control, condemned. Natural family planning, that's okay.
And woven through all of that is this deep concern about messing with the natural order, right?
Yeah.
Separating sex from babies, the domino effect.
Exactly. And what I find so interesting is how connected it all is. Paul VI wasn't just concerned with like separate issues. It was all part of this bigger vision of what it means to be human.
I keep thinking about how relevant it all still is.
Yeah.
Technology, the ethics of having kids, freedom versus responsibility. It's like Humanae Vitae just tapped into these timeless human questions.
No, it really did. And those questions are only getting, well, trickier as technology keeps advancing, which makes me think, what if?
What if?
What if technology could perfectly predict like a woman's fertile times, like with absolute certainty, no guesswork?
Okay, interesting.
Would that change things, you think, for the church? Would that get rid of the argument that NFP is interfering with natural processes?
Yeah.
Or would it create, a whole new set of problems? It makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does. And that's a perfect place to leave it, I think. Listeners, if you're as fascinated by all this as we are, I highly recommend you check out Humanae Vitae yourself. Read it, wrestle with it. It's a tough read, but it's worth it, especially if you want to understand these big conversations we're all having about faith, family, what it means to be human in this crazy world. So until next time, keep diving.